That vest is tacky, Dad. Jessica's voice was sharp as a pin as she studied her reflection. At Greystone, they don't let anyone out of place ruin the photographs. I held the small blue velvet box tighter. Your mother, she wanted you to wear this locket on your wedding day. Jessica opened the lid, the old gold catching the light. She sneered. It's antique. You really think this can stand next to a Vera Wang? I already have a diamond necklace. Don't embarrass me. The air went cold. The bridesmaids suddenly found the floor fascinating. The makeup artist busied herself with a clean brush. I placed the locket on the vanity, where it looked small and lost among the glittering gift boxes. Jessica turned, her smile as sweet as poison. Tonight, you stay out of the main photographs. Remember that. This is the Sterling wedding, not yours. A cold weight pressed against my ribs. The USB drive in my pocket was a reminder. Sometimes silence is its own kind of blade. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you? And where are you listening? This room was born to make a man feel smaller. I knew it the moment the revolving glass door sealed behind me, leaving the faint, lake-scented wind in its wake. The late afternoon sun sliced through the two-story windows, dissecting the air into layers of shimmering dust. The light caught the motes, not me. At Greystone, even the dust is treated like an honored guest. The rest of us are left to fend for ourselves. A river of people flowed past, parting around me like water around a nameless stone. Tuxedos, tailcoats, flowing evening gowns, a flawless performance of etiquette and excess. I adjusted my lapel. My suit was tailored in an era when people still stood in line at the bank on Fridays, the smell of paper glue mingling with the scent of their sleeves. The fabric was still good, the seams still straight, but its cut was out of tune with the string quartet, stroking their bows up front. I touched the button, a harmless tick of a retired man, and told myself, just stand to the side, don't get in the way of this floor, polished as a lake surface. Laughter rose around me, not the head-splitting kind, but the overly brilliant sort, like a fresh coat of wax on rotten wood. Kisses that brushed cheeks and shoulders, gazes that tilted up to just the right height, greetings with just the right warmth. It all fit together like a manual of protocol. I took form on the glass surface, a slightly darkened reflection, leaning against a pillar of white hydrangeas that towered over my head. If a camera were to pan across a room, it would pass over me as smoothly as it would a potted plant. No need to refocus. The restaurant manager approached his tie as slender as an apple peeler's blade, checking guest name cards. He stood before me, his eyes scanned past, and then he moved on as if I were an empty coat rack. A tray of champagne drifted by, the bubbles fizzing like a soft rain on the rims of the glasses. I reached out, then pulled my hand back, the frugal habit of a man who had lived his whole life on a teacher's salary. Don't take what isn't offered. Don't drink if it's not your turn. Across the hall, a group of the Sterling men gathered in a semicircle. They didn't need to claim a space. The space claimed them. One smoothed the placket of his shirt, another checked a message and chuckled, a smile so private it seemed meant only for the sky. Their wealth didn't spill over. It stood firm, self-assured as a precisely measured wall. I stepped back into the shadow of a flower vase to avoid blocking the path of a white dress gliding toward them. Jessica. She moved as if she had her own personal breeze, the lace and satin catching the light like the skin of a pink snapper. My daughter didn't look at me, or maybe she did a glance as quick as a blink to confirm I was still in my proper place, on the sidelines. The bridesmaids fluttered by like a flock of small birds, each trailing a pastel-colored ribbon. I heard someone let out a polite daddy that vanished into a peal of laughter. If she were to hug me now, the embrace would be hollow, meant for the hallway, not for me. Oh, there you are. A crisp female voice snapped from behind. Beverly appeared, her hair bouffant, her wrists trailing a persistent perfume. She handed me her empty glass, her eyes still fixed on the head table. Veuve Clicquot, please none of that second-rate Prosecco for the guests. She said, please like a soft exclamation point, more muscle memory than intention. I took the glass, her warmth still clinging to it. Two people at the nearby table leaned into their menus, performing a perfect act of not seeing. I was about to speak when Beverly truly saw my face. Her mouth froze, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, I'm so sorry. You're..." The rest of the sentence was drowned out by the strings. I nodded, returning a smile of sufficient politeness. Then I placed a glass on the buffet table next to a tray of strawberries scored with surgical precision. I wasn't serving drinks. I wasn't playing any role other than my own. Greystone liked everything in its proper place. The sign Greystone Country Club, since 1927 hung in the corner, its serif font sober, as if to remind everyone that history is a form of currency. I turned my back to the glass, my reflection a thin line against the glittering backdrop. A check. 1, 2, echo from the stage, the technician tapping the microphone for good measure. Involuntarily, I remembered the black tape microphone in my chemistry 10 class from years ago. It always crackled, but a light tap was all it took to silence the kids. There, I had the right to name things. Here, everything was already named before I walked in. A young server pushed a pastry cart by, the smell of butter and baked sugar mingling with the air-conditioned breeze. He looked at me for a second and nodded. I nodded back. For tonight, it was the most discreet of handshakes. Those acknowledgments, small as coins, were heavy enough to drop into a pocket and make a small sound. I slipped a hand into my inner pocket. The feel of the old envelope's edge steadied my heart. A yellowed envelope, its edges slightly frayed, one corner worn like a scratch on wood. On the outside, written in blue ink, R. Vance. I opened it just halfway and saw the faded receipt, a deposit for Greystone from many years ago. The money was drawn from the joint savings account I shared with Clara. The day our daughter said, "Someday, I'm going to get married here." We didn't have much, but it was enough to plant a seed in the future. Clara had smiled, her hand in mine under the warm, yellow light of this very hall, and said softly, "We're putting this down so we don't have any regrets." I folded the envelope, running my finger over my signature as if to soothe the child. At the reception table, laser-engraved name cards were lined up. Sterling Table 1, Sterling Table 2. The right-hand column was sparser. A handwritten card sat on top. Robert Vance, father of the bride. The word father tilted toward the edge of the card as if afraid of falling off. I picked it up, set it down, the sound of plastic on wood like a soft exhale. The music shifted to a wedding standard. Someone whistled the first 2 notes and then stopped. The scent of cut flowers sharpened as a staff member topped up the vases. The cold, viscous smell of freshly stripped stems. I took another half step back, pressing my back against the cool glass. Outside, the golf course was a deep green, the edges of the grass rippling in the flat wind. A deer glided past the edge of the woods and vanished, leaving a few leaves trembling in its wake. I watched Jessica from across the hall. She paused for the photographer to adjust the lighting, holding her dress at the right angle, tilting her chin to the right degree. Everything was so perfectly fitted it looked like a pre-printed design. I wanted to walk over, to ask the familiar, foolish question of American fathers. "Have you eaten anything?" I'd asked that question so many times from the time she was 10 until now, and it still hadn't fallen from my grasp. But the photographer's hand waved dismissively. One sec here was the length of a song. I didn't blame anyone. No one was intentionally pushing me away. They just didn't see me. The thought came to me calmly, like a small boat drifting to a harbor after the waves have settled. I stood still, letting the crowd pass like water. A bridesmaid tossed her hair, and a single silver sequin landed on my shoulder. I brushed it off as gently as dusting chalk from a blackboard. In my breast pocket, something hard pressed against my ribs, a small USB drive with a dark metal casing. I left it there, as still as a stone placed on papers, to keep them from blowing away. Tonight, they would call me by my role, father of the bride. I could wait. The things that needed to be said should arrive at their appointed time, not a beat too soon. The young woman with the schedule approached, whispering, "Mr. Vance, we'll be entering the ballroom in 15 minutes. She smiled with her eyes, a rare form of politeness that couldn't be bought. I nodded. I said, "Thank you," and understood that those words were a bridge strong enough for me to cross this distance. Across the way, Beverly returned with Richard Sterling. He had the walk of a man accustomed to floors that never buckled. They stopped beside a group of guests, laughing softly. Their smiles slid over me like rain on wax glass. I let them pass, let their voices blend with the clinking of silverware like distant waves. The technician set the microphone in its stand, twisted the latch, a clean click. I remembered my old classroom, the way the kids would sit up straighter when I began to write a chemical equation on the board. Back then, no one was invisible, at least, not in my class. The thought made my shoulders straighten just a little. I put the envelope back in my pocket, pressing it gently to settle it. I put my hand in my other pocket, touching the edge of a small velvet box. Its corners softened with age. I didn't take it out. Not yet. I just let it sit there, like a silent answer. I took a deep breath, the smell of flowers, of butter, of floor polish, and turned toward the hallway leading to the ballroom, where a string of yellow lights hung like a path of well-trained fireflies. I would go in. I would sit in my place. I would keep my back straight and my hands still. And if it was my turn to stand, I would say little. At this age, most of what a man holds on to isn't initiative, but discipline. I heard the faint clink of glass against glass, like a clock counting down somewhere in the hall. A very small crack had just appeared in the polished wall of the evening. No one heard it but me. It was enough for me to realize I haven't been erased. I've only been blurred. And some things once blurred are seen more clearly. The hallway to the photography room was long and overlit, like the inside of a massive, open gift box. White fabric draped both walls, and spotlights scoured every corner, making everything feel cold and artificial. A tilted wooden sign listed the shot list in white chalk. Bride with parents, bride and groom with sterling family, candid laughter. I stood at the very edge, watching my daughter adjust the train of her dress. Jessica tilted her chin at just the right angle, a lock of hair falling with a practiced casualness that must have been rehearsed 100 times in the mirror. When her eyes swept over to me, the smile remained, but in the sharp intake of her breath, I heard the coldness. The suit is fine, she said, her voice low, just for me. It wasn't the fine of approval. It was the fine of dismissal, the kind that means get rid of it. Before I could react, she added, try to stay out of the main shots, Dad. I nodded, swallowing slowly. In my pocket, the USB drive was ice cold, pressing against my chest like a steel memory. I placed a hand on my lapel to steady myself. The photographer adjusted his lens. Let's start with the sterling side. He smiled, but I saw the lens angle shift slightly, as if to avoid the frame I occupied. Even the photographer seemed to find the ceiling suddenly captivating. Jessica moved closer, her fingers brushing my sleeve. Her hand on my sleeve felt like dusting a shelf, a polite gesture, but a clearing away all the same. Just stand here, Dad. She pointed to the edge of the white backdrop, a place where the light cut off sharply, too dark if you stepped out, too extraneous if you stepped in. A never quite right position. I listened, I stepped, I stood still. Chad approached. Gray suit, tie knotted with geometric precision. He held out a hand. I took it. My son-in-law's handshake was like one from an ATM, cool, firm, and lifeless. He looked down at his phone, his thumb swiping upward. Not a word. Just the blue light from the screen illuminating his face, revealing a complete and utter indifference. The photographer paused for half a second, then panned away. Perfect, he said, his voice like a line from a script. I let my hand drop, leaving the space between Chad and me empty, wide enough to avoid another touch. A thick cloud of perfume arrived before the person did. Beverly was back, her smile as sharp as an apple peeler's blade. She placed an empty glass in my hand, her eyes not lingering on me for more than a fraction of a second. Veuve Clicquot for me, none of that. Prosecco for the secondary guests. The perfume was expensive, the courtesy, cheap. I took the glass, feeling the chill of it seep into my fingers. At a nearby table, a caterer in an apron looked up, then quickly looked down again. But that fleeting glance was real, a moment of social recognition. I placed the glass on a side table where a server would find it. Beverly had already turned away, her perfume lingering longer than her footsteps. Jessica turned back. Dad, we need a few more with the Sterlings. You should stay out of the main photographs. The words were quiet, as sharp as the edge of broken glass. I nodded again. Each nod felt like a period at the end of a sentence I never got to write. It was time for the bride with parent shot. The photographer called it out. Jessica came near, placing her hand on my sleeve, just enough for the pose. I rested my hand on her back, a touch as light as if on a borrowed object. Chin up, Jess, Beverly directed from the side. Robert, could you step back half a pace so Jess can be the focus? Her voice was candy sweet, but the wrapper held a razor blade. I stepped back. The flash exploded. Look at your father, the photographer prompted. Jessica looked at me for exactly 1 second. Her eyes were smooth, cold, like a lake swept clean of wind. I wanted to ask, have you eaten anything? That useless, quintessential question of American fathers. I smiled, the flash exploded again, and then it was over. Done, the photographer said. The word was light, neat, like the closing of a book. It struck me with perfect clarity. My daughter curated her image more carefully than she cultivated her relationships. She knew which roles should be illuminated and which should recede, which light was flattering and which people were necessary. And if my presence threw the composition off, I would be politely ushered out of the frame. Mr. Vance, I do apologize for the mix-up earlier, Beverly said, turning to me again with a playful tone. I was just coming from the staff corridor, force of habit. An apology not for what she'd said, but for being caught saying it. I replied, it's no problem. I understand. The most polite response, closing the situation like a gift box. In my pocket, the USB drive pressed harder. The secret rested there, like a seed in cotton wool. Clara used to say, don't touch it, it will crack its own shell. I left it alone. The photographer moved on to the couple. Jessica and Chad turned to each other, fingers loosely laced, smile standardized. Chad kissed her forehead on cue, a well-rehearsed beat. Everything operated smoothly, not a step out of place. Standing on the outside, I found myself macing the high school football field. Real sweat, real movements. Here, everything was a perfect shot. Another caterer walked by, a tray of pastries trembling slightly. He caught my eye and nodded. This time, the nod was definite, the look of someone who has seen enough to understand. I nodded back. Among the stage smiles, these small nods were real. Dad, Jessica turned, her voice all business. We're going to take a few more with our friends and then head in. You just need to be in the front row for the speeches. Remember, stay out of the main photographs. She gave my sleeve a light pat, an empty, perfunctory gesture. The conversation with me was over. I nodded one more time. Habit, the nod of a 60-year-old man, like the soft closing of a door to keep the draft out. I stepped back, leaving enough room for the light to catch the most beautiful smile. At Greystone, everything was neatly packaged. A single word, fine. A light touch, a nod. These polite details cut deeper into my pride than any direct insult ever could. I unbuttoned my suit jacket for a breath of air, then buttoned it again. My fingers brushed against the small, blue velvet box in my other pocket, its corners softened by the years. Clara's locket was inside, silent. It wasn't time. I took a deep breath, watching the yellow light pour onto the floor like honey. Tonight, I was relearning an old language, the language of waiting. At my age, I am fluent, outside the frame but still standing straight. One only has to know how to wait, and waiting, in itself, is an answer. The Greystone bridal suite was blazing, the bulbs framing the mirrors reflecting a white glare so cold it washed the color from your skin. The air was thick with hairspray, an acrid sting that caught in the back of your throat like smoldering smoke. On the vanity, a collection of gift boxes was arranged like a display at a luxury boutique. A Tiffany blue box, tied with a white ribbon, several glossy black boxes, a paper bag with silver embossed lettering. Everything had a system, a color palette, an outer shell designed to score points with a camera lens. Jessica sat at the center of it all, her hair pinned into a high chignon. A makeup artist was dusting a bright powder down the bridge of her nose, while a hairstylist tilted her head, misting another layer of spray to set the look. My daughter, in her wedding dress, was truly beautiful. So beautiful it reminded me of mornings when she was little. running barefoot in the yard with her sandals about to fall off, yelling for me to come see a caterpillar transforming. The only difference was that today's beauty was constructed with powder and the work of a team, not the uninhibited joy of childhood. I stood in the doorway, my hand tied around a small velvet box with worn corners. "Jess," I said, my voice hoarse but trying for warmth. "I have something for you." She glanced up, a slight nod. "Come in, Dad." Her eyes never left the mirror, a smile flickering and disappearing as if someone had hit a delete button. I walked over and handed her the box. "This was your mother's. She wanted you to wear it on your wedding day." Jessica opened the lid. Inside, a simple gold locket rested on the faded velvet. I heard the soft click as she worked the hinge. That sound pulled me back 2 decades. I saw Clara in our small kitchen, her hair in a low ponytail, wearing a thick tan sweater. She was bowing her head so I could fasten the locket around her neck. My clumsy fingers brushed her skin, cool and soft, smelling of cheap soap and morning coffee. Clara laughed, reminding me, not too tight. I still have to smile. Inside the locket was a picture of Jess at 5 years old, braided hair, a gap-toothed grin, eyes shining. Every day, Clara would open the locket, look at that tiny photo, and snap it shut. The little click of the locket used to mean home. Jessica lifted the locket from the box, turning it over in the harsh light. "It's vintage," she said, her tone indifferent. She called it vintage the way a realtor says needs work. And a nearby bridesmaid gave a polite little laugh, quickly covering it by fussing with the hem of her dress. The makeup artist didn't meet my eyes, mercy, or training. I couldn't tell. Meanwhile, Jessica held the locket against her chest, then set it down on the vanity, next to the Tiffany blue box, the glossy black boxes, and the other luxury items. It sat there, small and lost among them. "It's beautiful, Dad," Jessica continued, but her voice was the one you use to console a child whose toy has just been rejected. "But it doesn't go with the Vera Wang, and I already have this." She gently lifted the glittering diamond necklace at her throat, a gift from the groom's side, no doubt. "Everything has to be on brand today. You get it." I nodded. "I get it." The two words were dry, closing a chapter of memory like shutting an old drawer. I still wanted to say more, pointing to the locket's hinge. "Your mother loved the sound this made. She said it sounded like the house was locked up, safe for the night." No one responded. Another bridesmaid smirked and changed the subject. The hairstylist kept spraying. The hairspray burned the air. Memory couldn't breathe. Jessica pushed the locket aside so it wouldn't be in the way as the artist added a layer of highlighter to her collarbone. "Just leave it there. After the party, we can take some private pictures, and I'll wear it for those." She emphasized the word private as if it were an optional add-on, less important than the main photographs. I fell silent. In my eyes, the locket was still the heart of a home. But here, it was just an accessory that clashed with the color scheme. The vanity was a retail display, and my memories didn't come with a barcode. A bridesmaid held up her phone. "Selfie time." They all huddled together, eyes wide, lips pursed. I stepped back to make room for the flash. In that moment, I heard a click in my ears, not from the camera, but the memory of the locket. The little click of the locket used to mean home. A coordinator poked her head in. 3 minutes until the bride with parents shot. I nodded. Jessica had already turned back to the mirror, practicing a smile measured in millimeters. I stepped back into the hallway. The door closed behind me, its soft latch echoing like another click, but this one didn't signal safety. It signaled the closing of an era. I put my hand to my chest, where the locket used to be. It wasn't there anymore, but I knew that soon it would be more than a keepsake. It would become evidence, an undeniable reminder that love can be measured by brand names or color palettes. In the gray stone hallway, I understood something. The 5-year-old girl with the pigtails had left me long ago. The bride in the mirror was another woman entirely, living in a world of labels and concepts. And I, her father, had been placed outside the frame. But memory doesn't die. It just waits to be opened with a click. The aisle, strewn with white rose petals, stretched out like a deserted road. I stood beside my daughter, my hand in the correct place on her elbow, stepping in time with the high, keening notes of the string quartet. The violin strings sawed at the air. I kept my back straight. The scent of flowers and floor wax mingled, cloyingly sweet and cold. We passed the bright side of the pews. The bright side looked like a snowfield, blank and blinding. Rows of chairs, tied with white bows, sat empty, looking like unspoken sentences frozen in time. Jessica's grip on my arm was precise, not too loose, not too tight. The exact pressure of a choreographed move. She did not look at me. I did not look at her. My role was that of a hired escort, steady but anonymous. Heads turned for the wedding gown and the violins, but no one turned for the man in the out-of-style suit walking beside her. I counted the steps silently, just as I used to do when I stood at the head of a classroom. 48 steps from the door to the altar, 3 breaths in between to keep my heart from outrunning my feet. We stopped at the dais. Jessica released my arm as quickly as one might pull off a glove. She gave her hand to Chad, her smile aimed perfectly at the camera. I retreated to my seat in the front row, on the bright side. The entire row was mine. The officiant opened his book, his voice just warm enough, the words sounding as if they'd been poured from the same mold for every wedding. I stared straight ahead at the altar, not looking around. To my left, the floor was polished so brightly I could see the reflection of a few new silver hairs at my temple. Behind me, the whispering began. It wasn't furtive. It was pitched just loud enough to slide through the air and land in the intended ear. 2 female voices, smooth, rounded, well-practiced. "Is that the bride's father?" one said. "I heard he's a retired schoolteacher. The pension must be next to nothing." The other replied, her first word drawn out like a semicolon. "Well, she's lucky. She's rescued." "Rescued?" they said, as if decency were a shipwreck. A waiter older than me winced at their whisper. He set a water pitcher on the table beside me, his wrist trembling slightly with age, then gave me the briefest of nods, the nod of a man who has worked long enough to know what's right and what isn't. I nodded back. An agreement passed between us. Even in a storm of rumor, a little bit of weight can be placed on the table. At the altar, the officiant spoke of honor and cherish. The sounds were round and beautiful. Jessica looked at Chad, her eyes glistening right on cue. I kept looking straight ahead. I thought of the spelling of those words, the letters standing straight as columns. I thought of how they are worn down by the tongue. I didn't turn around. I let the whispers pass over my head like wind over a tin roof, loud, but unable to break through. "I heard he's all the family she has on that side," the first voice continued, the volume rising a fraction. "Poor thing, rescued from all that." The word "that" was drawn out, a hand circling an entire life. The second voice chuckled. "Chad is so kind. A real rescue." They used the language of the sea for a dinner party. In a way, they were right. Some people love to throw lifesavers, but theirs come with an invoice attached. I raised a hand to adjust my tie, then lowered it. Nothing was out of place. Everything was in its proper position. They were at the altar, I was below. They spoke, I recorded. Rumor is wind, but documents are memory. I listened, and the words arranged themselves in rows, like names in a great book: name, date, infraction. No pen needed, no eraser required. Retired schoolteacher, I noted. Rescued. All that. 3 items, 3 keywords, 3 pieces of evidence. The officiant's voice moved to the "if anyone objects" part. The room fell silent, the synchronized hush of a well-rehearsed choir. I looked up at the ceiling, where the chandelier dissolved into drops of light. Here, silence was protocol. But my silence, I realized, was no longer avoidance. It was compression. I placed my hands on my knees, lacing my fingers together, holding them tight as if to brace a door about to burst open. Behind me, they weren't finished. I heard, "He still lives in that tiny little house he bought 40 years ago." "Sweet," the other voice purred, the sound like glass clinking, a bit stuck. I thought of my wooden house, the old swing on the porch in summer, the maple tree in the backyard that turned color every October, the coffee maker that gurgled every morning, the sink whose pipes I replaced myself 4 times. To them, stuck was a trap. To me, stuck meant staying. And staying is a verb that requires muscle. I didn't turn around. I sat straight, my eyes on the smokeless candles burning at the altar. I thought of Clara. What would she have said? Probably she would have nudged my hand under the table, and whispered with a small smile, "Let them talk. It's just the wind." Clara always believed the wind would die down. I had learned otherwise. The wind can blow out a candle, but paper remembers. Paper doesn't breathe, so the wind can't take anything from it. I used to teach students how to distinguish exothermic and endothermic reactions with litmus paper and a column of mercury. Things that smolder leave a mark, even if the eye doesn't see it right away. This afternoon, I would not argue about the word rescued. I would simply place it in my evidentiary file, alongside the other items, the old deposit slip, the USB drive against my ribs, the locket lying cold on the vanity. We would be speaking a different language soon, not the language of rumor, but of video files and bank statements. At the altar, the officiant invited everyone to stand. The groom's sigh rose in a wave of fabric, their boutonnieres trembling slightly. I stood with them, alone but not lost. Across the aisle, Beverly squeezed Jessica's shoulder lightly, and Richard placed a hand on his son's back, the gestures of a family that knows how to perform for a crowd. I had learned something today. Being a good actor isn't a sin. It just isn't the truth. They exchanged rings, they kissed, the applause broke like rain on a tin roof. I clapped, in rhythm, at the correct volume. No one was looking at me. They didn't need to. I no longer needed them to. In the brief silence between bursts of applause, my mind felt like an archive, with the light switched on rows of files. Standing straight, clearly labeled, wedding reception whispers, groom's family empty chairs. I pulled out a drawer and added a final note. Silence intentional. After the ceremony, as the crowd spilled into the hall, the old waiter passed by again. He set a pitcher of water near my elbow, his breath coming like he'd just climbed a long flight of stairs. "Your daughter is very beautiful," he said, his voice a low, old American mumble that smelled of mints. I nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "I have 2 daughters myself. Sometimes people don't see everything they should." The words landed like a wedge, propping a door open. I nodded again. He walked away, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his steps were even. I returned to the reception hall. The yellow lights hung down like pre-drawn flight paths. Laughter erupted like flares and then died out. The MC tested the microphone, 1, 2, 3, then gave his professional practice laugh. "Are you all ready to celebrate?" I walked past the groom's tables, laden with glassware, and the bride's tables, where there were more flowers than people. A young waitress carrying a tray of pastries passed by, shaking her head ever so slightly, as if trying to dislodge the scent of hairspray from her hair. I sat down at the head table, where the father of the bride card was placed. In front of me was a perfectly set collection of silverware and a napkin folded into a fan. I unfolded the napkin and laid it on my lap. Back straight, hands still, heart calm. My silence was now a solid thing, with weight and edges, something that could be set on a table. Soon, I thought, the speeches would begin. Polished words would be poured like chilled wine. I didn't need to interrupt that flow. I just had to hold my own glass steady. The MC stepped onto the stage, his smile open to the correct width, his voice rising. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for a few words from the groom's family. Please welcome Mr. Richard Sterling." The applause crashed again. I let out a long, slow breath. In my mind, the files were closing. The hardcovers were clean, the labels neat. The public trial had not yet begun, but I already had the deposition. I placed my palms flat on the table, feeling the cool linen under my skin. I looked straight at the stage, and I held my silence, the kind of silence that belongs only to a man who is about to rise. I didn't turn around. The clatter of silverware on china faded as the master of ceremonies leaned toward the microphone, his smile as polished as a new pair of shoes. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Mr. Richard Sterling." The applause rolled out evenly, not too loud and not too soft. The kind of practice applause learned at 100 other functions where etiquette is a competitive sport. Richard rose, holding the microphone with 3 fingers, as if it were a priceless antique. He moved to the center of the floor with the gait of a man who has spent his life in the spotlight. Back straight, each step measured, his smile opening and closing in precise cycles. Behind him, a slideshow projected lavish images. a sunset on the deck of a yacht, glistening glasses of wine, a veranda overlooking the deep blue of the Mediterranean. Thank you all for being here to celebrate with us, Richard began, his voice warm and articulate, each syllable weighted like gold. Today is more than a wedding, it is a union. When two families who share the same values come together, you create something greater than the sum of its parts. In business, I call that synergy. He paused, waiting for a ripple of polite laughter. It arrived right on cue. They spoke of synergy as if marriage were a merger. We were recently on a trip at sea, Richard continued, gesturing lightly toward the screen. I was standing at the bow, thinking about vision. In Chad, I see the drive of a leader. In Jessica, I see the refusal to ever settle for anything less than the best. And today, those two values become one. Two families, one vision. The applause broke out again. Beaming faces turned to one another, nodding as if witnessing a major acquisition. I sat at the bride's table, the empty chairs around me like a snowfield. The cold back of my own chair pressed against my shoulders. I stared straight at the stage, my hands resting flat on the linen tablecloth. Everyone else was clapping. I was breathing slowly. The MC returned, his transition seamless. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. And now, let's hear from our beautiful bride. Jessica stood, her wedding dress sweeping the floor like the edge of a wave. The spotlight caught the diamonds on her wrist, casting small, sharp shards of light. She clutched the microphone with both hands, her shoulders slightly hunched, her gaze artfully moist and vulnerable. To see all of you here is truly a dream. The room offered a collective, gentle laugh. Chad, she said, turning to him, you are my anchor. You taught me to never settle for less than the best. She looked up, her smile dazzling. Thank you, Mom and Dad, Sterling, for welcoming me, for showing me what standards truly are. Her gratitude sparkled, her aim did too. The room went still as Jessica shifted her tone. She turned toward me. And, of course, I have to thank my father. Hundreds of heads swiveled in my direction. Somewhere in the back, a fork scraped against a porcelain plate, a tiny alarm bell. I didn't grow up with much, Jessica said, her smile faltering slightly. My father is a simple man with simple dreams. He taught me how to endure, how to make do with what you have. And because of that, I learned one thing, to demand more. A few scattered, uncertain laughs dotted the room, as if some people still thought this was a joke. She paused, tilting her head to let the light trace a clean line along her cheekbone. He is a good man, she said. I won't deny that. The clinking of a few glasses. But Jessica lowered her voice. As a provider, as an example of ambition, he taught me the one thing I never wanted to be. She waited half a beat, then delivered the final blow. My father is a pathetic failure, broke and stuck in the past. A collective shudder went through the room. Without turning, I could hear it all. The stifled giggles of the younger guests, the soft gasp of an older woman, the rustle of a tablecloth as someone ducked their head. My back was straight. There was no anger, just clarity. The thin thread of hope that my daughter might see me differently tonight had just been severed. Jessica raised her glass, her smile once again coating sweetness. But you don't have to worry, Dad, she said, her voice lilting like a psalm. Chad and I will take care of you. We'll make sure you're taken care of. The words landed as softly as velvet, but as coldly as chains. An offer of rescue that turned me into a charity case in front of the entire room. The perfume was expensive. The courtesy? Cheap. The MC quickly stepped back in, leading the applause. How touching. The clapping stretched on, filling the uncomfortable silence. I looked down at my plate setting. The knife, the fork, the spoon, all in perfect alignment. At my age, you throw fewer things, but you remember longer. I cataloged the items. Good man divided by poor, provider divided by pathetic failure, divided by broke, divided by stuck, divided by we will take care of you. They think money is air. If you're poor, you're just breathing wrong. I took a sip of water, breathing slowly. My heart beat steady. Jessica took a bow, the diamonds flashing one last time. The room applauded for longer than was necessary. I quietly fastened the button on my suit jacket. The small click echoed the sound of the locket from years ago. I looked up. my eyes finding an empty patch of floor near the DJ's booth. It was a perfectly clear space, unoccupied, clean, as if reserved for another event entirely. I knew my path. Straight, short, no need to push, no need to ask permission. In my breast pocket, the small metal object pressed against my chest, the USB. Cold, heavy, silent, but full of words. I didn't think about revenge. I thought about timing. The truth arrives when it is meant to, not a moment too soon, not a moment too late. It just needs someone to press play. I rose. The chair scraped softly behind me. A few heads turned. I paid them no mind. Before me, the stage, the courtroom was waiting. And this time, I was not the defendant. I was the one running the trial. After Jessica's pathetic failure line, the room seemed to drift into another layer of air. The sharp laughter was gone, the applause silenced. All that remained was the sound of a spoon touching porcelain, a chair scraping softly on the floor, someone clearing their throat to fill the void. The sounds mixed, then sank. I could hear my own heartbeat return to a slow, steady rhythm. 1, 2, 3. I reached up and buttoned my suit jacket. A small gesture, but in my mind, it rang out like a deadbolt locking into place. I buttoned my jacket like a man turning a key. I was no longer the one on trial. I was opening the door to a different courtroom, one where I would preside. The MC scrambled back to the stage, his voice straining for cheerfulness. Ladies and gentlemen, next up, we'll be cutting the wedding cake. I raised my hand, not high, not rushed, just enough to interrupt his rhythm. I added no words. The MC froze, forcing another laugh that was as thin as paper. Ah, yes, perhaps, before the cake cutting. I kept my hand silently in the air. Silence was no longer avoidance. It was becoming a summons. Jessica set her glass on the table. The sound of crystal on linen was as cold as a period at the end of a sentence. She looked at me, a flicker of worry in her eyes, before quickly pulling her bridal smile back into place. Chad shot to his feet, his hand gripping the edge of his chair. "Sit down," he said, in the tone of a boss used to ordering employees around. It was the first sentence he had spoken to me all night. I didn't answer. I just walked to the empty space near the DJ booth, where coiled cables and the reflections of blinking lights lay on the polished floor. My pace was not fast, nor was it slow. It was the pace of a man who has already made his choice. The DJ, a young man with slick back hair and a headphone clamped over one ear, looked up. His eyes were a question. "Is this on the schedule?" I didn't have a schedule. I had evidence. I placed a small silver USB drive in front of him. It felt heavier than anything of its size I had ever held. A light swept across the engraved initials, CV Clara Vance. I spoke, my voice as flat as paper. "Play it and bill me." I assumed full responsibility. The DJ blinked, his hand hesitating. His gaze flickered to the bride and groom's table. Jessica bit her lip. Chad was furious. "Security! Get him out of here, now!" Two guards in black suits materialized from the right wing, broad-shouldered, their radios blinking. They moved directly toward me. From the back of the room, a familiar figure detached himself from the seats. Leo, faded shirt, sleeves rolled up, his stride decisive. He reached the dais and held up a hand that offered nothing but air and certainty. "The man has something to say. Son, stand down and listen." Chad lunged forward. "Get out of the way." Leo didn't need to shout. He was taller, steadier, his dark eyes as impassable as a roadblock. The air around him became a wall. The two guards slowed, exchanging a glance. The venue manager, standing by the door, gestured for them to lower their hands. I knew the rule. In a family dispute, the staff defers to the eldest. They looked at me. I was the elder. The atmosphere in the room changed. Pity vanished. In its place came curiosity, then a wary respect. A few people half raised their phones, then lowered them. No one wanted to bet on the wrong side. Jessica's trembling hand went to the glittering necklace at her throat. "Stop it, Dad. This is my wedding." The word "my" was a final, severing cut. I filed it away. "My wedding?" I asked, my voice low but clear. Why wouldn't you want everyone to see a family video? Jessica was silent. Chad growled. He has no right to be here. I do. I interrupted, my gaze direct. The trustee does. The word trustee landed like a stone in a still pond. A few of the older guests furrowed their brows. They understood. It wasn't just a title. It was legal authority. Leo added, just listen. 10 minutes. Then you can call whoever you want. And they is the strong 8 minutes. I corrected him, my eyes fixed on the screen. Clara was never one for long speeches. The DJ took a breath and plugged in the USB. The wedding slideshow froze, the screen going black for a beat. Against the black, white letters appeared, loading. The room held its breath. In that moment, the word fine echoed in my head. Fine in the hallway, fine in the mirror, fine in the plea to stay out of the frame. It was a bell that was finally fading. Then, silence. Silence had a new name. The MC mumbled, we're having a slight technical. I'm right here, I said, without looking at him. Anyone looking for who's responsible? I'm right here. I saw the young waitress pass with her tray of pastries, her wrist trembling slightly. She glanced at the screen, then at me. In her eyes, I read, the jury has been seated. Beverly moved in close, hissing, softly, are you going to humiliate your daughter in front of everyone? I don't want anything, I replied. Clara wanted to speak. The DJ rested his finger on the spacebar. He looked up at me. Are you sure? I nodded. Play it. Richard finally stood, his voice like a clause in the contract. You will be responsible for any associated costs. I'll cover them, all of them. I tapped the mixing board 3 times. An invisible seal. The USB clicked as it connected. The sound took me back to the click of the locket Clara fastened every morning. Home wasn't in Greystone. Home was in the sound of a latch finding its groove. The screen lit up. Clara appeared, sitting in her old floral armchair, thinner than I remembered, but her eyes as bright as a lantern in a storm. The room's rhythm of breathing changed. A napkin slipped from someone's lap. No one bent to pick it up. I stood slightly to the side to give everyone a clear view. I didn't lean against the wall or look for a chair. I chose my position between the DJ and the stage, separated from my daughter by an apology she had not yet learned to say. My dearest daughter, Clara's voice said, raspy with illness, but warm. Each word was direct. None were wasted. The entire room listened, and in listening together, they became a jury. Chad opened his phone, searching for power in the small screen. It was useless. Beverly was rigid, as if held in a brace. Richard crossed his arms, his smile gone. Jessica slumped in her chair, the layers of makeup failing to hide her trembling. Leo lowered his hand from the dais. The 2 guards stepped back, standing watch like statues. The MC put down his microphone and fell silent. I told myself, not as a comfort, but as an entry for the record. No defense can win against the truth properly illuminated. They had the microphones, I had the evidence, and from this moment on, my silence had a new name. It was no longer endurance. It was the authority of the presiding judge. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking, like, or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you and where are you listening? The light from the projector cast a soft, hazy glow on the wall behind the stage, like late afternoon sun filtering through an old lace curtain. On the screen was Clara, sitting in the faded floral armchair from our old living room. She wore an ivory-colored cardigan, her hands resting lightly on the armrests, her posture relaxed but her face etched with the lines of her illness. Her voice came through, hoarse and thin as paper, but every word carried an undeniable weight. Hello, Jess. Clara smiled, her eyes looking directly into the camera. If you're watching this, then today must be the day you wear your wedding dress. I'm sorry, I can't be there to hold your hand, to adjust your veil, or to whisper some nonsense to help you relax. But I have a few things I wanted to leave with you. It'll be short, I promise. The sounds in the reception hall softened. Chairs shifted quietly. Whispers died down. People weren't just listening anymore. They were looking up. I stood silently beside the DJ's table, my hands clasped behind my back. Clara's voice filled the room, making me feel as if she were standing right beside me, her hand on my arm. Remember the storms? Clara continued. Every time the thunder cracked, you'd run into our room, crawl between us, and pull the blanket up to her nose. Your father would say, "That's just our rude neighbor knocking on the door." Then he'd tell you that the lightning outside was the white horse of Princess Jessica. Princess Jessica rides the lightning, and you fall right back to sleep, even as the windows rattled in the wind. A few soft laughs echoed from the corners of the room, not loud, but like an exhale of shared memory. In the third row, an old, frayed-hemmed handkerchief was pulled out. The woman holding it pressed it to her eyes and held it there. The crowd tense from the earlier speeches seemed to unlock. Shoulders dropped, gazes softened. Clara smiled, her lips trembling with effort. I still remember the pink wedding dress you drew for me when you were 5, with purple puff sleeves and the rainbow train. You made your father hang it on the fridge for a whole year. You always knew what you wanted. She paused, her breath catching. You also knew what you didn't want. And sometimes, Jess, it's that very thing that makes you feel like you're lacking. The room settled further. Jessica sat heavily in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap, her face stripped of its artificial bridal smile. The emotional makeup had cracked, revealing the real face beneath a young woman who was both frightened and confused. Clara's tone shifted, her voice becoming clearer and stronger. There's a truth your father and I kept from you, not to deceive you, but to protect you from the most contagious feeling of all, entitlement. The air grew still, people sat up straighter, as if awaiting a verdict. When your grandmother died, she left me everything she had. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to change a life. Your father, that stubborn but generous science teacher, told me, don't spend it, plant it. And so we planted a seed. A thin smile touched Clara's lips, her eyes shining with pride. The image on the screen changed. Her face faded, replaced by a white document with black text. At the top, it read, Van's Family Trust. Below that, valuation statement. In the top right corner, date, the 15th of March 2020. And at the bottom, unaudited snapshot, prepared by Fairview Advisors. The music cut out completely. In the vast hall, there was only the sound of heartbeats and sharp, indrawn breaths. In the center of the screen, a number appeared in a pale yellow box. Total portfolio value, $38,247, $591,34. A collective gasp went through the room. A fork slipped from a guest's hand and clattered onto the floor with a hollow sound. The old waiter froze, his hands tightening on his silver tray. Jessica let out a choked breath, as if she'd missed a step on an invisible staircase. Chad looked like someone had cut his power. His eyes darted around, searching for an explanation, struggling to fit the number into the power chart in his head, and failing. Beverly clutched her purse, while Richard merely tapped his arm in a slow rhythm. The habit of a man calculating risk. Clara's face returned to the screen, her gaze sharper now. Jess, she said, enunciating every word. Money isn't a gift, it's a tool. A tool can build a house or it can tear one down. It has no morality. The person who wields it does. Your father is the trustee, the one who holds and executes my will. A silent tremor ran through the room. All eyes turned to me. I didn't move. I simply stood beside Clara's voice. You thought your father wasn't enough, Clara said, her voice dropping. The truth is, he was enough in ways you never saw. He hid that abundance so you could learn something else. Value isn't found on a price tag. Value is how you treat the people who held you up when you had nothing. A woman in the second row buried her face in her hands. The man beside her pulled his chair closer, not touching her but sitting near. A silent declaration. Clara smiled, a look of weak but resolute strength. From this moment on, Jess, you can't say you didn't know. That valuation on the screen is your reminder. It's the seed that has grown. And I have to ask, will you use this tree to build a home or to burn one down? Across the room, the breathing slowed. People were no longer thinking about the money, they were thinking about the responsibility. Clara's voice softened, becoming deliberate. Your father was by my side through 4 years of sickness. He worked night shifts to pay for the medicines insurance wouldn't cover. He read to me when my eyes grew too weak. If you want to know what value is, Jess, look there. I looked up at the screen, feeling as if Clara's eyes were truly meeting mine. She had brought me back from the position of the accused to that of a respected witness. Clara took a deep breath. All right, she said. I have spoken from the heart. Now, for the practical matter. She held up a piece of paper, her voice as bright and clear as if she were reading a legal document. The Vance Family Trust. Trustee, Robert Vance. Valuation statement, the most recent, as you've just seen, is an unaudited snapshot, prepared by Fairview Advisors. From now on, any decision that makes you a beneficiary will go through the trustee. Not because the money is more important than you, but because you are more important than the money. The room was stretched as tight as a wire. People leaned forward, waiting. Clara offered a smile that was both an embrace and a blade. I love you, Jess, she whispered. And because I love you, I have to set standards. The screen changed. New text appeared, slow and deliberate. Conditions. The Clara Vance Legacy Trust. The first line began to materialize. 1. Proof of labor. The room was utterly silent. No one breathed loudly, no one touched their silverware. They sat there, waiting for the conditions to be read. And in that silence, a silence that had a new name, I heard Clara's voice. Warm when speaking of memory, bright when speaking of numbers, and firm when setting the terms. I understood. From this moment on, the story was no longer about the crime of being poor. It had become a test of character. The screen remained lit. The light came not from the party lamps or a photographer's flash, but from the simple frame of Clara's video. She sat there in her old cardigan, but her voice had changed. It was clear, decisive, the voice of someone who was both a mother and the author of the rules. This isn't a whip, Jess, Clara said. This is a map. The words fell into the room like a heavy stone. The clinking of silverware and the whispers went silent. Clara tilted her head, a fleeting smile passing over her lips before she continued. Money is never a salvation. It is only a tool. And the tool must be placed in the hands of someone who knows how to use it. I am not punishing you. I am rebuilding the road so that you can find your way back. This road has 3 milestones. If you pass them, you will become a worthy heir. If not, the money will remain in the trust to be used for the community. The screen changed. A list appeared, neat and bullet-pointed. Next to each condition was a small empty checkbox, waiting to be ticked. Condition 1, proof of labor. Clara read slowly, like someone reciting official regulations. 5 years of full-time employment, no sterling assistance. All work must be verified by a W-2 or 1099 form. No inherited shares, no gifted seats on a board of directors. It must all come from your own sweat and your own time. Jessica blinked, her lips parting and then closing. Chad turned, looking around as if searching for someone to share a laugh with, but no one met his gaze. A few of the older guests, men and women who had built their own careers, nodded slowly, their eyes sharp with understanding. Clara continued, work first, then wealth. On the screen, a red checkmark lit up, like a stamp pressed onto a manila folder. Condition 2, proof of compassion. Clara took a labored breath, but her voice did not waver. 1,000 hours of volunteer service at the Northwood Hospice, where I spend my final days. You cannot donate money in its place. You must be present. You will serve meals, wipe tables, push wheelchairs, and sit and listen to patients tell their old stories. When you learn to bend down, to listen, and to be a friend to those who have nothing left but time, you will understand that compassion cannot be bought. A subtle shift went through the room. The old waiter set down his tray and stood up straighter, as if he too were being reminded of something important. Near the back, a male guest tapped a rhythm on his thigh, nodding to himself. Compassion, then claim, Clara stated. A second red checkmark appeared. Condition 3, proof of wisdom. Clara held up the final piece of paper, her voice firm. 1 year of financial counseling with a state-certified professional. 1 year of couples therapy with your husband. The final reports from both counselors will be sent directly to the trustee. There will be no exceptions. Jessica flinched. Her hand flew to the silver necklace at her throat, as if seeking comfort. But the jewelry, a gift from Chad on a business trip, now felt like a meaningless token, lost in the sound of her mother's voice. Chad gripped the arms of his chair, his jaw tight. He understood better than anyone. This wasn't about emotion. This was a legal fortress, an incentive trust, drafted by the hand of a woman they had assumed knew only blind love. And now, every word was a barrier between them and that fortune. Clara looked directly into the camera, her gaze both gentle and piercing. This is not punitive, it is restorative and character-weighted. 3 red check marks stood in a line on the screen, a completed checklist. The air in the room had changed. The whispers of pity and the looks of disdain were gone. The audience, now a jury, looked at Jessica not with sympathy, but with an expectant gaze, waiting to see if she had the strength to pass those 3 milestones. An old man with a shock of white hair nodded slightly. The gesture was like that of a mathematician seeing an equation finally balanced. Another woman leaned over and whispered, "That's education. That's a legacy." Clara's voice softened. "Jess, I love you. If you choose this path, I will be smiling wherever I am. If you refuse, the money will still bear fruit. But for others, for people who understand labor, compassion, and wisdom." A collective sigh moved through the room. A few of the younger guests looked down at their phones, not typing, just avoiding the eyes of their elders. Jessica's lips moved, but no sound came out. Chad clenched his jaw and turned away. Robert stood perfectly still, his hands folded in front of him, saying nothing. He was no longer the outcast. He stood like a gatekeeper, and the gate itself was the will Clara was reading. In the frame, Clara closed her eyes, as if gathering her last bit of strength. Then she opened them, and they were unusually bright and clear. "There is one more thing," she said. "Clause 7, B, the failsafe." The room went completely still. Clara paused, a faint smile on her lips. "If you fail to meet the 3 conditions, or if you attempt to circumvent the rules, the trustee has the full authority to terminate your beneficiary status completely. The funds will be transferred to the community foundation, because your father's dignity is more important than any amount of money." The finality of it echoed like a gavel strike. Beverly's mouth fell open. Chad's hands clenched into fists, and Jessica looked as if the air had been stolen from her lungs. The screen began to fade. Clara tilted her head. Her eyes focused somewhere beyond the camera, perhaps, on the spot where I stood, or where she imagined Jess was sitting. "These are the rules of the game I've left for you. The choice is yours, Jess. This isn't a whip. This is a map." The screen went dark. The room was quiet for a long time. Then came the sound of a chair shifting, a soft scrape. A few of the older guests bowed their heads, as if they had just attended a different kind of ceremony, no longer a wedding. Jessica sat frozen, her hand trembling on her necklace. Chad leaned close to her ear and whispered something, but everyone in the room knew the game had changed. Robert looked straight ahead, seeking no one's gaze. He didn't have to. Clara had done it for him. And now, the entire room understood. Money wasn't for buying people. It was for building them. The screen went dark. The soft light of the hotel chandeliers filled the room, revealing every face. The vast hall felt suffocated. No one touched their silverware. No whispers escaped. Only the low hum of the air conditioning and a few quick, shallow breaths. I stood up. My shoes met the carpet with a dull, dry thud. The MC hurried to the microphone, bowing his head. "Ladies and gentlemen, the program will be paused for a few minutes for a family announcement." The entire room seemed to let out a collective breath. I touched the microphone, hearing a small pop. The echo spread evenly. "My name is Robert Vance," I began, my voice steady, neither high nor low. "I am the trustee of the Vance Family Trust, established by Clara Vance, and the executor of her completed will. I am now speaking in my capacity as trustee. What I am about to announce pertains to Clause 7B. A few eyes blinked rapidly. Those with legal experience understood immediately. This was no longer a family affair, but a formal procedure. I opened the thin folder, the paper already folded in half. I read slowly every word. If, in the sole discretion of the trustee, the primary beneficiary engages in prolonged, profound disrespect toward the family or its core values publicly or privately, the trustee may and shall remove said beneficiary from eligibility irrevocably, effective immediately. And Levin in the Grumman, then I translated it clearly, omitting nothing. If, in the sole discretion of the trustee, the primary beneficiary engages in prolonged, profound disrespect toward the family or its core values publicly or privately, the trustee has a right and obligation to remove said beneficiary from eligibility irrevocably, effective immediately. The air in the room froze. The room gasped at the words irrevocably, effective immediately. Someone dropped a spoon onto a plate, the sound echoing like a heavy punctuation mark. I looked directly at Jessica. She trembled, her lips moving. Dad, I didn't mean to. I raised my hand to stop her. Not aggressively, just to maintain order. Disrespect is a debt. Tonight, it came due. I lowered my eyes to the paper. In my capacity as trustee, and in my sole discretion, I declare, I remove Jessica V as beneficiary, effective immediately. Is in the loop. The microphone's echo made the sentence ring out like a hammer blow. Jessica burst into tears. Her voice choked. Dad, please, just one chance. I'll get a job. I'll go to the hospice. I thought of the locket in my breast pocket, the one Clara used to wear every morning. Its click seemed to echo. I looked up. The path of conditions, proof of labor, compassion, wisdom, closes with this finding. Have a gay? At the groom's table, Chad ground his teeth, growling low but loud enough. You idiot, you just threw away $38 million. A few heads turned, a few phones were raised, recording. I didn't answer him. I turned back to the audience. Clause 7b not only revokes eligibility, but also requires redistribution. I am announcing it here now. A can't. I opened to page 2. 1. The Clara Vance Fund will be established to provide hospice scholarships and bedside care at Northwood Hospice, where Clara spent her final days. A sharp intake of breath came from a corner of the room. A nurse who used to work there covered her mouth. 2. A portion of the assets will be preserved for retirement funds and small bequests to extended family members, at the advice of my counsel and myself. 3. The trustee will file notice and amendments with legal counsel by 9 a.m. on Monday. Any objections should be submitted in proper written form. No further debate at the dinner table. I folded the paper. The entire room was silent. Then, from a far corner, a faint round of applause began. It wasn't applause of celebration. It was applause for a procedure properly followed. Jessica buried her face in her hands, trembling violently. When she looked up, her mascara was smeared. I'm sorry. I didn't think. I looked at her, my voice flat. I thought for you for too long. Clara thought the hardest part for all of us. Today, I only have one thing to say. Enough. I turned to the MC. Please continue the program. If necessary, skip the cake cutting ritual. Chad sprang to his feet, snarling. You have no right. We'll sue. You'll lose. I looked him straight in the eye. Trust have lost. And paper remembers. Leo placed a hand out just in front of Chad's chest. Not touching, just a visible barrier. Chad stepped back half a pace. I left the dais. No one blocked my way. Many eyes shifted aside not out of fear, but out of a certain deference. When I reached the empty chairs on the bright side, I placed 2 fingers on the back of the first chair. In my heart, I whispered, Clara, you gave me the dignity to say enough. Jessica trembled. If there's no money left, can I still do the right thing? I turned back, looking straight at her. There is always a right path, but it doesn't have money in its name. She nodded slightly. The door to redemption was still open outside the trust. I walked out the back door. The night wind rushed in, carrying the scent of damp grass. From inside, a few scattered claps followed. Slow, steady rhythm. Disrespect is a debt. Tonight, that debt was collected. I bet 99% of you will hear this sigh and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you and where are you listening? The party hall door closed behind me, neat and final as a period put in the right place. Inside, the sound of whispers still lingered. But out in the corridor, there was only the steady tap of my shoes on the hard floor. I walked past the table of white roses, their petals scattered on the tablecloth, and the 5-tier wedding cake still uncut. A young waiter, holding a decorative knife, trembled slightly as he saw me approach. I gave him a small nod, and he nodded back, his silent gaze seeming to say, I saw everything. In the parking lot, the night air was cool. I opened the door to my old sedan, and the familiar smell of old cloth seats, stale coffee, and the wooden dashboard washed over me. The engine turned over with a steady hum, a small promise that some things could still be trusted. From my breast pocket, I took the blue velvet box, its edges worn. I opened it. Clara's locket lay still, its faint gold muted by the years. I worked the hinge and placed it on the passenger seat, opening the clasp so the tiny photo inside faced me. It was as if someone were sitting there, listening. I drove out of the lot without looking in the rearview mirror. There was nothing left behind to take with me. The road home took me past Northwood Hospice. The square windows glowed yellow, like kind eyes. I slowed the car to a crawl, letting it glide by. On the lawn out front, an iron bench sat under the shade of a tree. Clara and I had sat there on the days she was strong enough. I raised a hand in a small wave, like greeting an old friend. We kept our promise, Clara, I said softly, for only her and me to hear. The house appeared behind its low wooden fence. I caught the engine, letting the quiet settle over the street. In the living room, the old picture frames were still there. Clara in a wool hat, a 5-year-old Jessica hugging a teddy bear with a missing eye, me standing in front of a blackboard with chalk dust on my hands. I gently touched the edge of a frame, the dust so fine it was only perceptible by fingertip. In the kitchen, the wall clock showed 9:30. I set the locket on the table and opened it. The photo of a bright-eyed, smiling Jessica looked up. I put a kettle on to boil and made a cup of black coffee. The steam fogged the window pane. I leaned the locket against the side of my mug as if one person leaning a shoulder against another. From a drawer, I took a yellow sticky note and wrote in blue ballpoint pen. Respect isn't a tip, it's the table. I stuck the note on the kitchen cabinet, the one I reached for every morning to get a cup. My phone buzzed, a new email. The sender, Jessica. The message was a single line. If there's a way to start, tell me where. I read it, but I didn't reply. Tonight, silence was the only answer. On Monday morning, I went to the law office on the 3rd floor of an old red brick building. I brought the file with me, the locket in my inner pocket. The assistant took the documents, placing them gently on the desk. Notice an amendment, I said, as scheduled for 9 a.m. In a small conference room, the text was read aloud. I signed, the pen pressing into the paper like a nail securing a doorframe. Not to lock it, but to make it stand firm. The papers were in the system. Rumors are wind. Paper remembers. I left a second envelope, a letter to the board of Northwood Hospice. It was a few short, clear pages. The Clara Vance Fund would be for nursing scholarships and bedside care hours. No speeches, no ribbons, just turning money into real hours of work. On Tuesday, I received a postcard from Leo. It was a photo of a handsaw resting on a workbench. On the back, he had written in pencil, "They still make things that last by hand, cousin." I tucked the postcard next to the sticky note in the kitchen. The rumors had already spread through town. One version had me as a tyrannical old man, another had Jessica as the poor bride, and another had Chad as simply having misspoken. I didn't intervene. I let the paperwork do its job, to remember correctly. At the coffee shop, the waitress put an extra pastry in my paper bag without a word. I put an extra $1 in the tip jar, also without a word. Respect doesn't need a performance. It's a table where things can rest. A week later, the early morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting a golden glow on the scratched wooden table. The locket was still there, leaning against my coffee mug. I opened my email. Jessica hadn't written again. I hadn't replied. Some silences aren't abandonment. They are the time you give someone else to find the right words. I typed a few lines into a blank file: hospice fund, night shift scholarships, volunteer ledger time logging template, public note brief announcement, the Clara Vance Fund 2026 priority given to bedside care. I closed the laptop, wiped the table. placed the locket on a cloth napkin to dry from the steam. That afternoon, I went to the hardware store and bought a small wooden plaque. That evening, I used a wood-burning kit to etch the letters, one by one. Respect isn't a tip, it's the table. The smell of burning wood was warm. I hung the plaque on the kitchen wall, just below the nail where Clara's apron still hung. As night fell, I turned off most of the lights, leaving only a small yellow glow. The locket faced me as if it still had stories to tell. I said, quietly, "Tomorrow we'll buy the coffee you like." No one heard me but me, but it was enough.